earlier you were talking about stuff you wanted to share, so if you can just start off wherever you like.
Okay, so one of the things that you had asked in the set of questions that you sent was what military affiliation brought me to Cumberland County? Well, in September of 2009, I met Lieutenant Colonel Gwen Phillips, who was here actually from Helena, Montana, serving an active duty tour at Letterkenny Army Depot. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, which is roughly 3 hours west of Chambersburg. So I had never heard of Letterkenny Army Depot. I've obviously heard of Chambersburg because I had been to Gettysburg before and gone through Chambersburg, and Chambersburg is famous in the western part of the state for the peaches. So even though I knew a little bit about Chambersburg, I knew nothing about the military and nothing about Letterkenny. So long story short, that's essentially how I came to actually believe it's Franklin County, but
Okay.
I think, I'm not real sure. I should know, I've been here long enough to know the difference between them. But
What town are you currently residing in?
we live in a place called Enola, which
Okay,
is very close to here. It's maybe 10 or 12 miles from here.
I have some friends there. Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can just keep on
Okay.
going for as long as you need to.
Sure.
Want to.
So currently, in coming here, when I met Kevin, we had dated for about 3 years, and then we got married, and it's actually a really cute story. We got married at the Letterkenny Chapel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Have you ever even been
I've not, no.
on the depot? So it's a chapel that was built during World War II with some prisoners of war. This was all fascinating to me, being a history major. I mostly focused on East European studies, so I didn't know a whole lot about, especially local history. But apparently, prisoners of war were held at Letterkenny.
Okay.
So the Italian prisoners of war had built this chapel. The legend or the story goes, and I hope I don't misspeak here, that one of the prisoners was terribly depressed. I think his wife had died back home. He got word of it or something. So in order to try to help boost morale, they let them build this chapel. It's beautiful on the inside. It has it's like a big blue dome. It's very small and it's very old, but it's like very rich in history. So it's a really cool little place. And we thought, since we met, and that's the first time we met, the first time I came to Letterkenny, and he showed me around, and we saw this little chapel. So when we decided to get married, I thought, oh, how fitting with the whole military tie-in that we would get married in that chapel. So it was very nice. It was a very nice little ceremony to kind of tie things all together. So then I currently, from the time I had met Kevin, I had worked in Pittsburgh, and I had a house there and still stayed there, and would come out here probably every other weekend. And it was a little bit more difficult for him because he would have to get a pass. He was here on active duty, so he would have to get a pass to leave the base if he was going more than 50 miles, and Pittsburgh was more than 50 miles, so it was usually easier for me to come here. Well, at the time, I was working for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and I'm an IT person, so my role was a project manager. I worked on very large-scale implementations of the electronic medical record. So I could essentially work from anywhere. I didn't have to be in Pittsburgh. A lot of times as the project manager, you do kind of run a lot of things, meetings and different events, but for the days that you don't have that kind of stuff going on, it's a really nice perk to be able to work remotely. So it worked out well for us that I was able to keep my job in Pittsburgh. And even after we got married, probably for another 2 years, both of my parents were terminally ill. So I sold my house and chose to move in with my parents during the week while I was at work, and then still come here and basically just be here on weekends. But
And where was that your parents lived? Was that in
my
Pittsburgh
parents
too?
lived, yes, it was in a suburb of Pittsburgh called New Stanton.
Okay.
So part of the challenge in coming here after we got married was eventually I'm not going to want to continue to drive 3 hours to get to work one way. What am I going to do? Where am I going to find a job around here? And being a project manager in IT, I could work anywhere. I did not have to stay in healthcare. But I'm very passionate about that, and I've done that literally my whole career since I've graduated from college. So I got a job at Hershey Medical Center, and I'm still there today. And one of the other questions you had asked about was, what is my current job description? So it's a little unique. It's my title is actually called a Continual Service Improvement Process Manager, but it is within the IT department. So I'm very lucky that I was able to still do what I do, keep a good job, but be able to actually sleep in my own bed 7 nights a week instead of just 2. Now that created a challenge because that was 71 miles one way to get to work, 71 miles to get back. But because Kevin's job was in Chambersburg, it was just a lot easier for me to do the commute until what brought us here was a place called Defense Logistics Agency in New Cumberland is the name of the town. So that's where he is now and how we came to live in Enola.
All right.
So that's really when you asked what actually brought me here, and then the other question was, why did I choose to stay here? Well, because I did get married and was able to seek very favorable employment in this area for my area of work. So I feel I've been very fortunate with that.
All right. And sorry, if you had more, you can just.
Well, the only other part of that I was thinking, there was another question that had asked why have you stayed here? And again, I realized that my perspective is different because I'm not in the military, and the questions are more geared towards if your tour ended or if you retired, why did you choose to stay here? But when my husband's tour ended, his active duty tour at Letterkenny, he leveraged an opportunity to convert to a Department of the Army civilian.
Okay.
So it was an awesome opportunity. He had been trying to get into the federal government for a long time.
Is that the Department of Defense?
It's actually, he works for the Department of Defense now. It's very confusing. It's still, I still don't understand a lot of it, but I think it's just different buckets of money from where the money comes from for your paycheck. But
okay.
It was the Department of the Army when he was at Letterkenny, but it's the Department of Defense now in New Cumberland.
Okay.
So with me having the flexible work arrangements, him getting that opportunity, it made more sense for us just to stay here because there would be opportunities for both of us in this area.
Okay. And then, living here, have you seen any special cultural or possibly environmental effects that the military's presence has had?
Yes, absolutely. I think for one thing, probably the most popular thing would be the Army War College that probably most people, if you're not familiar with it, you probably will be if you're driving through on Interstate 81. But there's a lot of, they call it MWR, which I've learned a lot of this military speak since I've met my husband, but they offer a lot of really family-friendly things there. They have a movie theater right there. They have a swimming pool, a bowling alley, all kind of shopping. Like, there's a lot of things that you can do. Probably would be easier for folks that actually lived on base there that didn't have to travel around, but there's a lot of military things that it's important to me that that's instilled in his daughter. He has a 14-year-old that lives in Texas. So, for example, when you go to the movie theater, which is something you would not see in a movie theater anywhere else, but you stand up and do the, I think they play the Star-Spangled Banner before the movie starts, and everybody, stands there in attention. So it's just some really cool little things that's part of the military culture that I'm thankful that she gets to experience a lot of this because she doesn't get to see him very often. And when he goes to get a haircut at Carlisle Barracks, and she gets to see everybody in their ACUs walking around. The Army Heritage Center is pretty cool too. My husband and I are both very much into reading and historical things, and we've attended many lectures there. And some of them we've even been where C-SPAN has been there recording them, lecturers from all over the place. So that is something else that is really nice for being in a smaller area with not a lot of universities around. Like, I'm used to working in the city where there's, you have Carnegie Mellon, you have University of Pittsburgh, you have all these big colleges right there in one area. So those opportunities would not be unusual. You would have that a lot. Which is nice about here is you still get to do all of those things without actually being in a big city or having to drive into a city or attend something at a university.
All right.
I think the other thing about, back to the Chambersburg area, at Letterkenny Chapel, they have different ceremonies there throughout the year. There's actually a piece of debris that came from one of the Twin Towers in front of the chapel that they have set up there. They do a ceremony once a year. They have a really nice Christmas Eve ceremony there, a candlelight ceremony. There used to be a lot of community events and celebrations there. It's unfortunate that they don't hold them anymore, but they used to have parades. They do a lot of different things on 4th of July. They'd have fireworks. We would send his daughter to a camp they had there at the recreation center during the day in the summer when she was here. I think a lot of that was because of budget cuts and sequestration, but there were definitely a lot of cultural things that that you could immerse your family in.
All right. And then, have you lived in other military towns or just here?
I have not lived in other military towns. My husband did a tour right before he retired. It was actually a year ago, down at Fort Lee in Richmond, Virginia. So I would go to visit him, and we would stay on base at the housing there he would stay at. But outside of that, I've never actually, as a spouse, lived full-time on a military installation.
All right. And how would you compare the two towns, just from what you've seen?
Probably the biggest comparisons that I would make would be the size, just in general. When you go to a place like, I've been to Fort Lee a lot. I've been to Fort Sam Houston. I've been to Fort Leonard Wood. Those are just enormous installations. One of the things when you go there, Fort Sam Houston, for example, that's the big military healthcare installation in San Antonio, Texas. When you walk into their shopping center, it's not like the Army War College at Carlisle. As soon as you walk in, it's like a regular indoor mall. There will be a Coach store, like a very, very high-end women's fashion shoes and handbags. And it's just different stores the whole way along, just no different than you'd be in a high-end mall like in the city of Pittsburgh. So that, to me, was pretty fascinating. And when you come around here, it's a lot smaller. It's unique in the sense that, from my perspective, things that you would only find in, for example, a Saks Fifth Avenue or a Macy's, you can buy them in Carlisle. You don't pay tax on it, and it's right there in the store, which is unique. Like, I can't go to the Macy's in Harrisburg, in either one of the two Harrisburg malls, for example, and get Christian Dior perfume. But I can get it in the Army base in Carlisle. So it's kind of ironic. It's kind of funny, but I guess it just goes to show how mature that the Army has gotten with a lot of that stuff. And you can also purchase a lot of those things online and have it come right to your house, and it's free shipping. So
all right.
That's kind of unique.
So given the option, would you leave the area for somewhere else?
I think if we had some type of major career shift or an opportunity, one of us with our careers, but we've chosen to stay here. He went from Chambersburg at Letterkenny, the Army Depot, here to New Cumberland it was a good career move for him. Excuse me, but there are certainly other places that he could transfer to that we've talked about that. But we do really like it here. Excuse me, you're close to Pittsburgh, you're close to Washington, D.C., you're close to Philadelphia. You have all of the historical stuff here. There's a lot of opportunities from a career perspective here. It's a safe area. You have relatively no traffic compared to commuting into a major metropolitan area. I know people that I work with think we have traffic here. We really don't have traffic here compared to Pittsburgh. So We're going to stay put for a while. We're actually looking to purchase a house. We sold our house that we had lived in for 4 years when we moved here in November for Kevin to switch to this job. So I think we really like it, and I think we're going to hang for a little while.
All right. And I know your husband's retired. Does he receive a lot of benefits for living in this area? Or do you see other people getting benefits?
I think a lot of not only the cultural things, but from a perspective of people that are retired, and for the other reasons that I just mentioned about, like, the housing is very affordable here. The taxes are very affordable here. There's some really good schools around here. But one of the other things, and this is so ironic that you asked me this, because I just saw this today on LinkedIn, that Amazon is very big here, and I think they're going to have an even larger footprint here.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon is actually actively recruiting for active duty military people that are going to be retiring or transitioning to a civilian within the next 6 months to go work at their facilities. Or if you're a military spouse. So for example, if my husband would be retiring within the next 6 months, or even just transitioning out, even not retiring, so you only did 5 years of active duty or whatever, and you're going to decide to not re-enlist, that there's a lot of companies around here that really appreciate and acknowledge the skill set that the folks in the military have. The things that you don't learn in college. Do you know what I mean by that? Or like something that you don't learn in a book, your leadership skills, your critical thinking skills, that companies like that are very busy, real time, focus on safety, that a military person would be an excellent candidate to fill those roles. So I think there's definitely opportunities in this area that they would, I don't want to say they cater to veterans, but they certainly appreciate the value that somebody with a military experience could bring to their corporation.
Okay. And I remember you mentioned your uncle who served in Vietnam.
Yes, my dad's brother, Uncle Milton. I do remember Uncle Milton because I believe one of the questions you had asked me was about my experience with the military, and I remember saying to you that I never knew anybody in the military before I met my husband, and then I said, wait a minute, that's not true. My dad's brother had served in the military. He was very, very young when I believe he was drafted, if I remember correctly from what my mom had told us when we were kids. And he was very, I don't want to be insensitive and use the word damaged, but he was very damaged or troubled when he came back. And I believe he had served 2 separate tours. He had had a lot of problems with alcohol. I don't think he ever did drugs. He was like an Eagle Scout, or whatever you call the Boy Scout troop leader. He has 3 children, and very, very family oriented, very gentle man, but very troubled, and he actually committed suicide. And I still to this day remember it like it was yesterday. I was living at college, and I had called my dad for something, and called him on the phone, and he was very irritated, and I'm like, what's the matter? And he said, oh, Milton just shot himself. I'm like, what? Thinking that perhaps it was an accident or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, was he okay? And he's like, no, he's not okay. And that's whenever my mom started really opening up, because I'm a lot older than you, but even my generation who was just being born around the time of Vietnam, there's still a lot of stigma attached to that, and people didn't talk about it and talk about things. And even today, I think there's still a stigma with the PTSD and different issues, but I think it's a little more accepted and open now than it was back then.
Yep, that actually leads me into the next one. From what you've seen with PTSD around here, do you think the military presence could be doing more, or do you think they're doing as much as they can?
I'm not real sure at the Carlisle Barracks. I know they have some medical facilities there. I've been with my husband before. When he was on active duty, he would go there for meds and different checkups and things like that. I'm not sure about, about this place in particular, but I do know that the Army has some pretty aggressive campaigns. The Army in particular, I'm not sure about the rest of it, but they have they've done a lot to try to prevent suicide, and I know it's a real problem, and they acknowledge that it's a real problem. Could you do more? You could probably always do more, but being that I've been in healthcare my whole career, I know at the end of the day it all comes down to money, and I don't know if, with the current administration, perhaps they'll spend or they'll provide more funding to focus on something like that because it is an issue. But I know there is definitely a support system from a medical facility perspective in Carlisle, but I really don't know any of the details about the services they provide for that type of problem.
All right. How are you doing on time, Reed?
20 minutes.
We're at 20 minutes?
We're at 20 minutes.
Okay. Let's switch to this then. Guess that's better. Did you have anything else written down that you wanted to share?
The only other thing that I think that would be, in my humble opinion, considered a hardship from the perspective of active duty, because I've been with my husband through both, an active duty, being here on an active duty tour, being in Richmond on active duty, being at Fort Gordon in Georgia on active duty, and being in the Army Reserves. When you're on active duty, there is a huge support system. When you're just a reservist that drills on weekends, there's absolutely nothing. So, for example, when I first met Kevin and the whole time he was here on active duty, there was a huge support system here. That's actually how I knew Colonel Leisure.
Okay.
I mean, we would never, ever be alone on a holiday. There's like this huge family environment, even though you're not a blood relative. Colonel Provencha, who was in charge of the depot at Letterkenny, was very much about that, all about the community and people watching out for each other and checking on each other. When he was no longer on active duty and he was just a reservist drilling on weekends, and I know in particular one time I remember I had a major surgery, and we don't really know anybody from around here. He's from Montana, I'm from Pittsburgh. We don't really have many friends or family around here. And I had no type of support system. So I remember sending a text message to the gentleman who built our house. And I only know him from all of the time we spent when we bought our house and finishing the inside of the house. I remember sending him a text message and asking him, if I need anything or if I get in a jam, can I text you? I mean, I'm sure I could always call 911, but just that little bit of comfort knowing that he was so far away. He was the whole way in Georgia. There's no way he was ever going to get back here. And I did have some complications after my surgery, and I just remember calling him. I was staying with my parents, and my dad was dying of terminal lung cancer, was very sick. My mom had advanced stage dementia, didn't even know who she was. And I remember calling him, like, so upset, crying, and having some issues. And he said to me, the only thing you can do is call the Red Cross to see if they can have me get some type of hardship to get me to come home. But I think that was very challenging. That was definitely a hardship, because had he been on active duty and I'd been in a place that had a family readiness group or support system, it would have been totally different. I would have had people checking on me. And remember I told you he was away the last year before he retired down at Fort Lee? We had that 4 feet of snow. Remember that?
Did you say he was in Richmond?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
We had like 4 feet of snow close to it last winter. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I have a shoulder injury, and I was in 6 months of physical therapy. There's no way I could shovel snow with that arm. I was literally trapped in my house for like 3 days. I remember, again, I texted the builder to say, do you know anybody that can come over and that I can hire to come over? And we had a really steep driveway, but I couldn't get the car out of the driveway to get out of the house. Now, I was obviously prepared. I had had enough food and that type of things. I wasn't in any danger from that perspective, but I literally was trapped in my house. The snow was about 3 feet up on even the porch that I couldn't shovel the sidewalk,
All right.
with the shoulder injury. So that that's difficult too, because again, not having, had I been on active duty, Colonel Leisure would have either been at my house or called my house or, you know what I mean, driven
Yeah.
over to check on me. So that I see as a hardship and a difference between the two. Not being military, that confuses me. I don't understand. To me, the Army is the Army is the Army, but it is totally different from that perspective.
Okay. And have you seen any environmental impacts the military has had?
I don't know about that. I know at Letterkenny it's a huge acres and acres, and I know they have railroad cars that come in there. I don't know if they're still utilized today, and I don't know if somehow that would have a negative impact in any way, but I know there's so many requirements to keep things, so many regulatory requirements and inspections and different things like that, that I'm not aware of anything that would be a negative impact on the environment. I think the Army's pretty good about following the rules and keeping up with that kind of stuff.
Okay. And then would you recommend the county to other veterans who are retiring or possibly looking for another base to be on?
Yeah, I would absolutely. I think it's a great place, especially if you have a family or want to raise a family. I think it would be fairly easy to transition your career here or to start a new career here. I think there seems to be a lot of big, what would you call it, like a warehousing. I'm not sure the name of that industry, but you also have some other bigger things, like you have Volvo, you have several military installations around here. You have Letterkenny, New Cumberland, you have the Naval Supply Depot in Mechanicsburg. There's a lot of opportunities around here that veterans would get preference on, places like that as well. So I think definitely it would be a safe and affordable place to live. It would be a nice place to raise your family.
Okay. Reed, how are we on time?
26 minutes.
Would you say your family, do you have any siblings?
I do. I have one brother and two sisters.
Did they affect any decisions you had, either living here or moving around, the travel? Made things harder, better?
It was incredibly difficult when my parents got really bad. Before that, I don't think so. They were very supportive. They all have their own families. I never had a family. So I don't think that would factor in, but it was incredibly difficult when my parents got sick and I was like 3 or 4 hours away from them, and if I would happen to be here, wasn't a problem when I still worked in Pittsburgh because I stayed with my parents to make sure somebody was always in the house with them. But when I got the job here in Hershey and then left, I didn't get home as often as I wanted to, and that was very hard because it would just be a phone call. Sometimes I'd get a phone call in the middle of the night and it would just be agonizing. Do I go home? Do I not go home? You know, it's starting a new job and you don't have a lot of vacation time, and my employer was not anywhere near as flexible as what I was used to working for UPMC, so that was a challenge. But probably a very, very little factored into it in a very small way. I am very close with my siblings, but it was just such a good opportunity to come here that I don't think it really had that big of an impact.
Are they from the Pittsburgh area as well?
They love it here. They come up here a lot. They come for every festival, Ice Fest, and all the different things in Chambersburg. And we've gone to the Army Heritage Center many times, and a lot of different things around here, Hershey Park. There's just a lot to do around here.
Yep.
And it's a day trip. You can go home the same day, which is great. You know, it's not that far away that if you just want to come up for an afternoon, you can. It's an easy drive. It's straight turnpike.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another advantage.
And how would you told me you grew up in, oh my goodness.
New Stanton.
Houston.
New Stanton.
New Stanton.
Yes.
I put down Greensburg, PA.
That's where I was born.
Okay.
Mhm.
So when did you move to, what was it?
Well, you asked me where I was born, and that was in a hospital in Greensburg, which would
Okay.
have been the closest hospital to where my parents had land, which is New Stanton.
Okay, and then how would you compare New Stanton to this area?
I think New Stanton's more of a transient area. It's a lot smaller, but it's a huge interchange off of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and you can get on other huge, like Interstate 70. Like, it's a big intersection to get on another, kind of like a thoroughfare or whatever you call it, like a pathway to get to a different place. So I think it's very busy, but it's more travelers. Although, I have to tell you, driving Interstate 81, 71 miles a day every day, is probably the most brutal commute. All the years I've commuted into the city of Pittsburgh, I've seen more fatalities on this road and been stuck in traffic, I can't tell you. Not because there were a lot of vehicles merging into a tunnel or something, but because of an accident on the highway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that too. Do you see, would you say the residents or other civilians in Cumberland County respect military members and retirees with?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think this is definitely a very pro-military area, and I think you probably have a lot of veterans that are here because of that, or people that work at some of these military installations because they were in the military. But I think it's definitely between, not only that, I also think that just the history of like Gettysburg and all these, think about it, the battlefields and things, it is definitely, I think, very appreciative of the sacrifices that people have made from being in the military.
All right. All right, well, that's all the questions we have.
Okay.
So, looks like we're done.